You're listening to the Vocabbett Podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Welcome to episode 4 of the Vocabbett Podcast. I'm Erica Abbett, a former English and history teacher, the author of the young adult novel Ahead of Her Time, and the founder of the vocabulary company Vocabbett. So one of my favorite podcasts is called The Creative Pen, and it's a writing podcast. And one of the things the host, Joanna Penn, does is provide a little personal update every week. And it's usually about her writing or her business, but I actually really love that part of the podcast. It's sometimes the only part that I listen to. And it could be that I'm just so goal-oriented. I get like a secondhand dopamine rush just from listening to other people accomplish their goals. Dopamine, by the way, is the happy chemical your brain releases when you accomplish your goals. You have other happy chemicals. You probably know endorphins get released when you work out. Serotonin you get from feeling socially secure. But anyway, I've decided to do something similar and share a personal update. And even throughout this part of the show, I will sprinkle in big words to help you get the 8 impressions that you need in order to master a new word. But beyond just using this component of the show as another vessel to build your vocabulary, I also just really want to take you guys along on the journey of this business that I'm building, because we really are still in its infancy. And I really hope that it grows into something one day. And I think it'll be really cool that we can go back and listen to this together and we can go on this journey together. So, personal update for the week. The biggest thing that I'm working on right now is overhauling the website. I had a really good conversation about it over the weekend with a friend, and we concluded that the current website is kind of like an old paper map. It has a lot of information in it, but no real direction, no real route for where I want people to go. I do suggest that people start with the book, but then it's kind of like, oh, here are some stories. Here's a podcast. Here's a game. Here's a class. And I kind of more or less just say, go wherever looks interesting to you. And that's fine. You really can do that and still improve your vocabulary, but it's not very professional and it creates a lot of confusion. And one of the other people that I was speaking to said, as a mom looking at your website, I wouldn't really know where I should be going here. I wouldn't really know how to really help my kid. And that was obviously really good feedback. So with the new iteration of the website, I want it to be more like Google Maps than a map. It should still have plenty of information, but I want it to be a lot clearer, kind of how you get from A to B, how you get from where you are now to exactly the steps that I want you to take in order to have a stellar vocabulary. So all of that Google and map talk was very apropos for today's vocabulary boosting short story. We're going to read a little story from Vocabbett called The Ghosts of Google Earth. And I got the idea for this story. This is actually a great way to get ideas for stories if you're a writer, by the way. I highly recommend swiping this tip. I got the idea for this story from something that I misheard. So I was having lunch with my advisees, and there were, I think, 11 of us at the table. And, across the table from me, it's a big table. I thought someone said the ghosts of Google Earth. And, my head whips around and I'm like, dude, what are you guys talking about? That sounds awesome. And it turns out like I totally misheard this conversation. They were actually saying something like go to Google Earth. But it got me thinking what the ghosts of Google Earth would look like. And the end result is this short story. It has, I think, 22, big vocabulary words, so to speak, in case you're curious. So you'll get an additional impression for each of those 22 words, in addition to the impressions of other big words that you've logged just chatting with me today. I've snuck a lot of good ones in here. If you would like to read along to the Ghosts of Google Earth, you can find this story at vocabbett.com. That's VOC and then Abbott, like my last name, ABBETT. The story is available just in regular kind of post version on the website, but then there's also a downloadable link at the top if you'd like to download a printable version. And that printable version also has definitions at the bottom of each page so that if you don't know what these words mean yet, you haven't had your 8 impressions, most likely you haven't. That's probably why you're here. You can still enjoy the story while you're still building your vocabulary. So without further ado, let's get to the Ghosts of Google Earth. The Ghosts of Google Earth, a vocabulary boosting short story by Erica Abbett. All the chattering souls gathered at 5 Manderley Place to discuss the most pressing matters of the century. The address was an old one in Connecticut, the type you'd expect ghosts to convene at, perpetually windy and overgrown, with shingles falling from the roof and paint peeling from the walls. Lightning cracked outside. Rain lashed at the windows. Only New England spirits were welcome, of course, though very few were in attendance. Most had gone on to a better place and had no further interest in human affairs, unless their families were affected. But some spirits preferred to stay right where they were, thank you very much. It was these spirits who convened that dreary October morning. Order! Order! Sir Gawain pounded his gavel on the dining room table, now positioned against the back wall as an impromptu judge's box. The ghost quieted until only Mrs. Wyspinski's voice could be heard. Sir Gawain proceeded, for it was well known that Mrs. Wyspinski's loquacity was impossible to contain. He cast a sympathetic look at Mrs. Wyspinski's companion, a Civil War-era soldier whose genial smile indicated he might be a bit deaf. "There are 3 items on the agenda for tonight," Sir Gawain said. "The first 2 deal with hauntings. The defendants have been found guilty, and as we have said before, the Society for the Betterment of Spiritual Causes has a zero-tolerance policy for these matters." "Hear, hear!" a voice called from the crowd. "Therefore, I put forward a motion to remove Anna Jeffries and Samuel Nelson from the Society, effective immediately. All in favor, say aye." "Aye, aye!" the crowd clamored. Sir Gawain drew a sharp line through the former members' names before proceeding. "The last item requires more discussion," he began. "It has come to my attention that there is a new human technology which may threaten our very way of life. It is called Google World." A wiry young man leaned down and whispered something to Sir Gawain. "Google Earth," Sir Gawain corrected himself. "Unlikely as it may sound, they're photographing the entire world. Most pictures cannot capture our likeness, of course, but if this technology continues to progress..." The crowd began to murmur, and Mrs. Wyspinski's shrill voice rose above the crowd. "Some cameras capture us. I made the family photo at my nephew's wedding. They thought I was a shadow in the trees, of course, but my hair looked lovely." "Indeed," Sir Gawain continued, "and this gets to the heart of the issue. Who can say how much the cameras will capture? We must, I'm afraid, prepare for the worst." "But how?" an older woman cried out. Her hair was still in old-fashioned curlers, and they shook nervously on her head as she spoke. "They got no business taking pictures of us," a lumberjack growled. The rest of the crowd echoed their sentiments. Sir Gawain allowed it for a moment before pounding his gavel once more. "Too bad we just banished Anna and Samuel," Mrs. Wyspinski said loudly, just as Sir Gawain opened his mouth. "Could have used them to take on these goggles." "It's Google's, Mrs. Wyspinski," Sir Gawain said, "and under no circumstances will we consider a haunting." Mrs. Wyspinski sniffed, and Sir Gawain proposed a list of alternatives. They included never go outside, only go outside at night, and hope that Google's technology doesn't advance to the point where ghosts can be seen. "I gotta say," the lumberjack interjected, stroking his grizzled beard, "I agree with Wyspinski. Man can't survive all shut up indoors like that. Good old-fashioned haunting is what we need." Mrs. Wyspinski shot Sir Gawain a triumphant look. "We can't reinstate Anna and Samuel now, of course," she said, "but if we agreed not to say anything and acted very quietly, we could." The lumberjack nodded. "All in favor, say aye." "Aye, aye," the crowd rang out. The futile cracking of Sir Gawain's gavel could barely be heard above the casting of votes. The spirits schemed all night, considering ways they could haunt Google Earth without compromising their collective moral compass as members of the Society for the Betterment of Spiritual Causes. Nothing could be done to harm the humans, they agreed. Sir Gawain finally agreed to join the ruse after this point was made perfectly clear. Unfortunately, this severely limited the ghosts' abilities. They couldn't do much but cause a cold wind to blow through the room, but they resolved that when Google's little car drove by, it would be the coldest car south of Antarctica. Days and months progressed until, one day, a telepathic message reached the spirits that Google would be visiting their own Connecticut neighborhood. "Get ready, people," the lumberjack growled. Mrs. Wyspinski grinned and rubbed her hands together, giving her deaf companion a wink. The spirits gathered on the front yard. As the car slowly pulled onto Manderley Street, they unleashed a torrent of chilling wind. One of the women, who was holding her cat with one hand and pointing at the car with one palm, Iron Man style, let out a delighted cackle as the windshield began to frost. The bewildered driver put on his windshield wipers, but the spirits didn't let up. Mrs. Wyspinski narrowed her eyes and continued aiming both palms at the vehicle. Her cheeks turned a pleasant shade of pink at the effort, giving her normally gray face new life. Finally, the car turned the corner and the ghost let out a jubilant cry. "Let's see him try that again," Mrs. Wyspinski said. The ghost celebrated with a special dinner that night, made with ephemeral indulgences from around the world. The international fare seemed only fitting, considering they'd just put Google Earth out of business. When Sir Gawain pounded his gavel sometime later and informed them that they had not, in fact, been successful in derailing the technology, all the ghosts reacted with similar levels of dismay. All the ghosts, that is, except for Mrs. Wyspinski. When she saw the photo that had been taken of 5 Manderley Place, she couldn't help but smile. With her rosy cheeks, she thought she looked quite attractive. Let someone try to mistake her for a tree this time. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that little story. I will be back on Thursday with another one. If you're hungry for more in the interim, there is always the book Ahead of Her Time, or if you're not quite ready for a whole new book yet, I also have a little novelette. It's called Death at the Villa Tarconti, and it's a mystery, but a fun mystery. I'm not out to scare people, even obviously when I'm writing about ghosts. It's pretty tongue-in-cheek. And Death at the Villa Tarconti is about a girl who's on a writer's retreat in Tuscany. And here's the tantalizing description I wrote on the back cover. Life begins to imitate art as, one by one, Lucy's fellow retreat-goers succumb to the dastardly fates penned by a fellow novelist, end quote. Which basically means that, accidents start happening and they mirror the stories that one of the people on this writer's retreat is writing. And so it's a fun little mystery. It's available on Amazon. It's called Death at the Villa Tarconti, and it's absolutely free if you're in KU. Otherwise, it's only about 50 pages, so it's just a few bucks, and I will include a link to that in the show notes. And I will be back with another vocabulary boosting story on Thursday. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss anything. And if you enjoyed it, please take a second to leave it a 5-star review. You don't even have to write anything if you don't want. If you just hit the little 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, it would mean a lot to me. It really helps push it to the front and helps other people find it, which, helps them too. So you're really doing something nice for a lot of different people if you take a second to do that. And yes, so I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I will see you on Thursday.